How did you so deftly avoid having a round of applause for yourself that was really worthy of what you were just saying? So hold on, can we just like... I'm going to keep my remarks brief. This is my 30th year on the climate beat. The climate change beat, I wrote about nuclear winter. They were going to cool the Earth. If the Cold War went bad, not only would the war be catastrophic, but we would chill the planet. That was 1985. 1988, so 5 weeks from now, June 23rd, this year is the 30th anniversary, another anniversary, of the day global warming became news. The science has been there. 1856, Eunice Foote, a woman from Seneca Falls, New York, did the first experiments of CO2 in a bottle and with a thermometer, and hey, wow, it got warmer than the other bottles. So the science has been clear. Her role was underplayed, actually not really known until 2011. The science has been there. The story started 30 years ago when Jim Hansen, this laconic Iowan physicist, told a Senate hearing managed by Senator Tim Wirth, that the greenhouse effect has been detected and it's warming our climate now. A week later, I went to Toronto to what was called the first International Conference on the Changing Atmosphere. That was 30 years ago, June 30th or so. And I wrote this cover story for the magazine I was working at back then. And I almost brought the actual copy, and this is really small, but so Discover Magazine, it was the cover of Discover Magazine. But the thing that I'll point out is that, and this says a lot about change, about attitudes, about the need for patience, about the possibility of optimism when something's hard. The ad on the back cover of the magazine, I finally got a printed copy on eBay this year. I hadn't had a full copy. Is a cigarette ad. It's what you see isn't what you get. It's Merit cigarettes. So a science magazine that I worked at was selling my global warming story with cigarette ads. And that says to me that why wasn't I sort of boycotting that at that time? It says that at that time it was unremarkable to think that tobacco, even in a science magazine, it was unethical to have to get your revenue that way. So it's important for me, considering the state of things now, to think back to that time, my own attitudes, and feel a little bit more, what's the word? Just a little bit quieter about when I see, how advertising and other media have been used to try to persuade people that the status quo is okay on energy, that kind of thing. But I just want to briefly say, I was glad that he mentioned Twitter, social media. My title at National Geographic Society is, it's interesting, it's Strategic Advisor for Environmental and Science Journalism, but I work in what's called the Media Innovation section of our enterprise there. This is the nonprofit part. And we are gearing up to do a lot of grant making for a new generation of communicators, journalists mostly, but also communicative people, scientists and others, who are trying to tackle these tough issues in new ways. And what's missed quite often is that old method that felt so comfortable back then, and a lot of you remember, you mostly grew up mostly in the 20th century, right, like me? Except for the high school kids. Walter Cronkite used to say, he made it so easy, he said, that's the way it is, right? Tuesday, whatever. So we didn't have to think, you didn't have to actually peruse. We all had these gatekeepers. In the New York Times, where I worked for 21 years, it was one of those gatekeepers. And you just read the Times and you felt validated and you went on. Now it's harder, it's definitely harder. The noise factor is enormous. Separating reality from fact is more challenging than ever. But Leon Walters right here, we were talking a little while, she won this fantastic award. The Goldman Prize is for heroic, ferocious heroism on sustained environmental issues. And how did she do it? That's the thing that fascinates me. Back on Earth Day in 1970, if you were convinced your water was polluted, we were just talking about this earlier, what would you have had to have done to make the change that you made in 2015, 2016? So much more to do, right? It was through the miracle of the internet. How did she find a scientist in Virginia? Internet. How did you build, when the EPA let you down, and everyone else there, under the Obama administration, remember, this is not all partisan stuff, how did you fill that gap? You found the things you needed out there in the information universe, and you cut through the noise, and you created change, and you're still doing it. So as a lifelong communicator, I was very wedded to that old, that old print thing, and the comfort zone there, letting someone else mediate your news for you. That's a form of communication, telling a better story, using better graphics, which, when I did .earth at the Times, every medium possible, whatever it needed to do, I stuck in there. But there's another way to communicate, which is having a better conversation. And there's a third way to communicate, which is how do you get something done? How do you find the person you can't solve it yourself. Who do you need? Well, you need a lab. How do you find that lab? And I'll give you one last example, the Volkswagen scandal. It was a $110,000 grant from a tiny nonprofit, ICCAT, it's an International Clean Car Transportation something, to West Virginia University laboratory. And they tested the car and they compared it to the computer, and guess what? The computer was lying. And it wasn't that they set out to do that, but that changed, what a giant change in the system that has been, not way beyond Volkswagen. You can be sure they're not the only car company that was having some issues. So that's communication impact to me. Finding those ways, we live in an asymmetrically enhanced world. It's bad, it can be very bad. 9/11, it worked the other way. Harnessing and recruiting terrorists is easily doable now. So that makes it, basically it's a choice. You all face a choice going forward. And that's the choice every day that excites me. It's really hard, and it leads me to think about this climate change problem in a different way. People often ask me, well, you've been writing about this for 30 freaking years. How do you stay sane? I have a kind of a diurnal rhythm. I'm optimistic every morning, and I'm usually kind of bummed out by around now. But then I meet someone like you, and I feel really energized. So with that, we're going to bring up Senator Michael Bennet, whose perhaps most valuable credential in this context is having run a school system, Denver. What an amazing accomplishment that is to have worked really hard on a tough problem. And that's the other thing. The climate problem has been perceived and conveyed for too long as a problem to fix, as opposed to an issue you work on. The war on cancer, the war on poverty in 1964, the war on cancer in 1971, the war on climate, Bill McKibben called it a war on carbon in 2017. But why is it not like those other things? Who in this room thinks we will solve the climate problem? You work on the climate problem, and you work in all your different facets, as a community organizer, as a scientist, as an activist, philanthropist, and you move on. And as a politician, you could maybe tell them about your summer plans. So Senator Michael Bennet, come on up.